everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Robert Sellers. I'm the chair of the Department of Psychology. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all today to the first annual Christopher Peterson Memorial Lecture. It is, as I said, my great pleasure to welcome you today, not only because I think that this will be an outstanding lecture from our guests, but also because I think many of us here are here in part to honor and pay tribute to Chris Peterson, our friend, outstanding scholar, great teacher, and just all around great person. Well, today we are fortunate as the first inaugural lecture to have members of Chris's family here joining us. So if I can put upon Carl, who is Chris's brother, who's here, and also Carl's wife, Patty, who's Chris's sister-in-law, and Carl's longtime friend, Lisa. So we're very, very fortunate to have members of Chris's family here at this first inaugural lecture. The order of the program today is, after I shut up and sit down, we'll hear some wonderful remarks from RD in the College of Literature, Science, and Arts, Susan Gelman, who also is a member of the Department of Psychology and a longtime friend and colleague of Chris. And after Susan's remarks, next we'll have Professor Sherry Olson, who will come up and introduce our keynote speaker today, Marty Seligman. So without any further ado, I'm going to invite Susan to come up and make some remarks so that we can move forward. Thank you, Susan.
So welcome. As Rob said, I am Susan Gelman. I'm the interim dean of the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts, and a professor in the psychology department. And I was a colleague of Chris Peterson's for the whole time he was at Michigan. I came in 1984, and I believe he came a couple of years later. So I've had the great pleasure of getting to interact with Chris in all sorts of venues over the years. And as I was saying to someone at the bench ceremony earlier, he was probably the most beloved member of our department. Rob also said at that time that we should celebrate Chris's life today and not be mournful, and I think that's right. But I have to say that I really miss Chris, and it's hard to believe that it's been a year since he's been gone. So it's just my great honor to have an opportunity to say a few words about him. So Chris's office was actually down the hall from mine, and in East Hall. That's after we made the move to the new building. And Chris would often pop his head in at odd moments in the week, and we'd talk about a million things, about music, politics, books that we've read, students. He cared so much about his students, about how my kids were doing, and Chris was invariably warm, funny, smart, a little sardonic. He never seemed in a hurry to get somewhere else, and I can't tell you how unusual that is at the University of Michigan. He really lived and embodied his motto, other people matter, period. And you would never know from his kind of, his approachable, sort of laid-back manner that Chris was a giant in the field of psychology. He is one of the greats. His work is tremendously influential, both inside academia and out. He has one of the highest citation rates of any psychologist over the past 30 years. He has over 24,000 citations. He was a public intellectual. His work was featured everywhere from the New York Times, Good Morning America. And of course, probably most important to Chris was that he really made a difference to the lives of our students. And this was reflected in his many, many honors. So of course he had all of the scholarly honors, but he also had a remarkable range of teaching honors. He was an Arthur F. Thurnow Professorship, which is a very select group of faculty at the university, selected by the provost as being absolutely stellar teachers. He won the Golden Apple Award, which is a student-nominated award for the best teacher in the college, or in the university. And he served on committees for more than 130 PhD dissertations and 70 undergraduate honors theses. And just if you think about the amount of time and attention and care that took for him, he would not enter any one of those committees lightly. It was a real commitment. That says a lot. I think it's also important to remember that just a couple of years ago, Chris directed an LS&A theme semester. These are these semesters that can be on any topic throughout the college, and it brings together different courses within the college, different outside speakers, events off campus, brings in community participants. It's one of the really great things about being here in LS&A. And he co-created one with John Chamberlain in political science and Nan Super Park, our own psychology department, called What Makes Life Worth Living. You can't imagine a better topic than that for a theme semester. And it was a tremendous success and really spread the word of positive psychology all across campus. So the Chris Peterson Memorial Lecture gives us a chance to honor and remember Chris in a way that I think he would really approve of, which is to say, with other people. So collectively, I'm so pleased that we have a chance to celebrate his life.
Dr. Seligman is the Zellerback Family Professor of Psychology and the Director of the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania. He is one of the most distinguished psychologists of our time. Dr. Seligman is widely known for his seminal contributions to our understanding of the causes, treatment, and prevention of depressive disorders. More recently, he played a major role in the development of an exciting new area of social science called positive psychology, which focuses on the scientific study of positive human traits and experiences, or as Chris might have put it, the things that make life worth living. Dr. Seligman has a long list of honors and awards that include 2 Distinguished Scientific Contribution Awards from the American Psychological Association, William James Fellow Award, and the James McKean Cattell Award, both from the American Psychological Society. He also is the best-selling author of several books, and in 2011, he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. As Chris Peterson's former mentor and close colleague for over 30 years, Dr. Seligman will be honoring Chris's intellectual legacy today by presenting the first Chris Peterson Memorial Lecture. The title of his talk is Chris Peterson's Unfinished Masterwork. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Seligman.
When I was composing the eulogy that I'm going to deliver today, I wanted to do it in the appropriate place, and I remembered Chris's favorite place of worship in Ann Arbor. So last night when I came in on the plane, I went to Zinkerman's, the eulogy. Chris died on October 9th, 2012. He was just on his way to Penn to attend a meeting on positive health, a committee that both he and I are members of. At 7 o'clock that morning when I woke up, I got the manuscript of his new book from Oxford and started to read it. And then around 11 o'clock in the morning, my secretary came in and said that Chris had died. He and I wrote 50 articles together and several books together. He was my closest and most treasured colleague. On his death, I'm one of those people who spends a lot of time on the internet, and my colleagues die in various listservs. I'm on several great ones last year. The outpouring of letters in grief on the internet was something I had never seen this like before or since. And I'm just going to read you one of them, which is representative. This is by Dan Bowling. Chris Peterson, noted University of Michigan psychology professor, died October 9th. The field of psychology over which he loomed is called positive psychology. He was informed of his passing with a short listserv message from Martin Seligman, quote, "My close friend and my closest colleague, Chris Peterson, died today." End quote. Stunned is too pedestrian a word to describe how I and hundreds of colleagues feel. The online outpouring of grief from the positive psychology community, which includes many of Chris's former graduate students, is overwhelming and ongoing. Mind you, academic message boards are not always the gentlest and mutually supportive of places, even ones with the word positive in their description. But this time is different, and there's a remarkable consistency in positive reminiscences. Warmth, humor, kindness, and humility are words used almost without fail in each post. Others could come to mind: rigorous researcher, critical thinker, influential writer, famed lecturer. Those take a backseat to the simple, humanistic character traits that Chris possessed in abundance. When you first met Chris, warm and humanistic wouldn't be the first words that came to mind. Bare of man, shaggy-eared, bearded, relatively shy and quiet. He could be intimidating if you didn't know him. Although he won Michigan's top teaching award last year, he was not a particularly eloquent speaker, certainly not charismatic in a Tony Robbins sort of way. He liked his cigarettes, and he'd drink a beer with you. His favorite post-class meal in Philadelphia was cheesesteak at Arthur's, at Oscar's Bar, a place that looks exactly like it sounds. He loved his parents, those close to him. He hated to travel. He could get away with the type of humor that would get most of us written up in private. In private, he was bemused by the fact that he'd become a celebrity in the scientific world after turning 50. He could actually get paid to speak if he so chose. What was so special about Chris that prompted the emotional response from legions of fans and admirers was because of his favorite saying, "Other people matter." This is how he lived his life. When you were around Chris, you knew you mattered. And by coincidence, in his book that I read that morning, Chapter 43 is called Having a Friend and Being a Friend. And here's what Chris said. Those with stronger social relationships, assessed by both quantitative and qualitative indices, had a 50% increased likelihood of survival. This finding held across age, sex, initial health status, cause of death, and length of follow-up period. So it bears repeating that other people matter. And in this case, mattering shows up in terms of increased lifespan. Here's a simple multiple choice test. What's your first reaction when you read about this finding? Which is not only reliable, but quite robust. A, I thought about how many friends I had and whether I had enough friends to make me live longer in a meaningful way. B, I thought about how many people for whom I was a friend and whether I had enough friends to help other people live longer in a meaningful way. My immediate response was A. I admit it. But as I thought further, I realized that B was a pretty good answer as well. And maybe a morally better one to boot. Note to students, sometimes your first reaction to a test question is not the correct reaction. Positive psychology can be criticized as much too focused on the individual. Many of the findings of this field are presented to the general public in terms of how they can benefit the individual. In other words, your increased happiness, success, health, and integrity. But sometimes doing the right thing does not always benefit the individual. Nonetheless, remains the right thing. At the funeral of my father, the rabbi said that times of grief are times to do scholarship. So when Rob asked me to give this lecture, it seemed to me the appropriate thing was to stop the eulogy part here and to do scholarship, which is what I'm going to do for the next 30 minutes. And what I want to do scholarship about is a piece of work that I found much too hard, and Chris found too hard, but Chris made a start on it, and I want to tell you about the start and its possibilities. This is unfinished masterwork. It's about what are the real mental illnesses. Chris had two major strengths that don't appear in our classification of strengths and virtues because they're local and not universally valued. The first was getting it out the door. Chris didn't shilly-shally about things. When he took something on, he did it. And in fact, he almost always did it sooner than you expected him to do it. The second one was just that. He always did at least as much as he said he was going to do, and usually more. And we had a third characteristic, which is found in the classification. He had a great sense of humor, but I was completely insensitive to it because I'm hard of hearing, and he told his jokes sotto voce. The last line was always sotto voce, so I could never hear his punchline, but I was told it was very funny. I could tell from the reaction. But for years, given those two strengths, the project I'm going to talk about today, I urged Chris to get done. And he said he would do it. He kept putting it off. And some questions are too hard for us. And the fact that even with his capacious intellect, he didn't finish this one tells us how hard this question is. The thoughts I'm going to give you on it today, I think, just scratch the surface of it. Chris went deeper, and I'll try to take you where Chris went. The basic idea has two parts. The first is simple. It's that DSM-3 through DSM-5, just published last year, don't tell you what real mental illnesses are. These are not categories. And the second, which I think was the masterwork, is that the 24 strengths in the classification of strengths and virtues do tell you what the real mental illnesses are. Let's start with what's wrong with DSM 3 through 5. DSM-3 was an attempt to throw out DSM 1 and 2, which was Freudian theories of mental illness, and replace it with reliable diagnosis. The issue in the early 70s that when we diagnosed schizophrenia in Philadelphia, you wouldn't have gotten the same diagnosis in London. So you wanted a reliable cross-cultural, if you will, symptom checklist, so you'd all have the same criteria for mental illness, so you could then do research on it. It was a research tool. And so it's a symptom-based classification. And importantly, to be diagnosed with a specific disorder, you typically had to have 5 out of 9 symptoms. And so for depression in DSM 4 and 5, you have to have 5 of the following 9 for at least 2 weeks. Depressed mood, markedly diminished interest or pleasure in almost all activities, significant weight loss, or decrease or increase in appetite, insomnia, psychomotor retardation or psychomotor agitation, loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness, trouble concentrating, and recurring thoughts of death. Well, there are a lot of virtues to diagnostic reliability, and indeed replicable research took place. But diagnosis by symptoms is a very primitive form of understanding. So smallpox in the early part of the 19th century and before was diagnosed by the presence of poxes on the face, fever, and death. And that was the diagnosis. But due to the work of Edward Jenner in the middle of the 19th century, the germ theory was articulated and then confirmed. And the correct diagnosis depended on the presence of the variola virus. And this is truly a major theoretical break because some of the cases that had poxes on the face and fever and death didn't have variola. They weren't smallpox. And other things which didn't have those symptoms but did have variola were smallpox. The difference between diagnosis by an underlying pathology and diagnosis by symptoms. Chris and I thought that DSM diagnoses were congeries of symptoms and without underlying coherence. And in throwing out Freudian theory, which neither Chris nor I believed in, the baby was thrown out of the bathroom. The baby being a theory underlying mental illnesses. Chris believed he had discovered such a theory. And a theory that emerged from the Character, Strengths, and Virtues book. I should say, by the way, even though I'm an author of it, I, like most of the 50 papers Chris and I did together, I didn't deserve authorship. What I basically was, I raised the money for it often, had some bright ideas, edited Chris's stuff, and he always insisted on giving me credit for that. And the same thing is true for the book. Chris came for 3 years to the University of Pennsylvania on sabbatical from Michigan from 2000 to 2003 and wrote the book, and it was nice enough to put my name on it. So I sort of believed it, but we presented a theory in the book of what is good in a human being. And what was good was called the strengths. And in order to have these strengths, and now I have to find a way to stop the rolling thing behind me. I'm told if I press S at the right time, it will. Our criteria for what a strength was was first, a strength contributes to fulfillment and to the good life. Strength is done for its own sake. It's morally valued in its own right. Displaying the strength doesn't diminish others. Almost every parent wants their child to have the strengths. There are rituals and institutions that within a society support the strength, and each of the strengths is universal. That is, every culture we can find, every politics, every religion endorses the strength. So the theory of mental illness, which I'm about to articulate, his theory, proceeds from a theory in which you know what is right in a human being. It says you have to know what is right in a human being before you can know what's wrong in a human being. So let me see if I can find my way to this table. Because this is the heart of the talk. I'm going to want you to stare at this table, since the table is what Chris bequeathed us. So here's the table. You look at it carefully, and I'll keep it on the whole rest of the 10 minutes or so I'm going to talk. The theory that proceeds from this is Aristotelian. One thinks of the notion of health and the golden mean. And here's the theory. It claims that psychological health is the presence of the strengths. And then the real disorders are the absence of the strengths, the opposite of the strengths, and the excess of the strengths. So this is a theory that follows directly from the table. And it generates 72 pathologies, 24 strengths, and 3 ways of going wrong. And he did his best to give us the first approximation of what the theory would look like. Now, if you look, have you got it so far? Good. Now, some of his, and now I'm turning to why this isn't, that's the masterwork, and now I'm turning to why it's incomplete. And I hope someone here, or some group of you will complete it. Much better than the bench would be to do this one. So if you look at forgiveness, which is the top one under temperance, forgiveness over there. I mean, it does make sense that the opposite of forgiveness is vengefulness. The absence is mercilessness. And the excess is over-permissiveness. Chris used to mock the word whatever as being an example of modern permissiveness. If you look at kindness, love, it seems to fit that cruelty is its opposite, indifference is its absence, and something like busybody intrusiveness is its excess. And hope, down third from the bottom, despair seems to be its opposite. Its absence seems to be present-mindedness. And Pollyannism, which is not mischaracterization of Pollyanna, which is a great book, by the way. She's nothing like what you think Pollyanna is if you read it. But Pollyannism in the colloquial sense would be its excess. So that works. But some of them don't work too well for me, and this is why I bring it up as unfinished. So if you look at under courage, bravery being the first one, cowardice seems to be its opposite. Foolhardiness, its excess, but fright doesn't seem to me to be its absence. So I don't know what would go there. Importantly, you're going to start to get the sense of my last few minutes, which is when you think about cowardice as a pathology, this is indeed what DSM is about. So even though it's not politically correct to talk about panic disorder and phobias in your patients as being cowards, every clinician knows that that's what's going on. So cowardice really fits across the board here. People are just afraid to say it. Chris wasn't afraid to say it. Fairness, which was that was Chris's highest strength, by the way, on his when he took his own tests. So fairness, which is in the middle of justice, it seems that prejudice makes sense as its opposite, but partisanship as its absence and detachment as its excess, they don't seem right. So one very demanding task of what Chris left to us from Matt's last theorem is filling out this table sensibly. The second task is what is the relationship of the Peterson pathologies to DSM? So there's 72 Peterson pathologies, there are about 350 DSM pathologies. The Peterson pathologies are related to the DSM disorders, but they don't subsume them. Nor do the Peterson pathologies map into DSM, nor are they intended to. This is an alternate theory. So, for example, if some of the Peterson pathologies are related to DSM, despair, under the opposite of hope, is certainly right at the heart of major depressive disorders. And it doesn't capture everything in major depressive disorders. In DSM, you have to have it for 2 weeks, and you have to have four others of the 9 almost every day. And the DSM disorders don't map into the Peterson disorders. So panic disorder and generalized anxiety disorder, DSM categories, are not to be found in this table, although cowardice is right at the heart of both of them. But it doesn't distinguish panic from generalized anxiety disorder. So those of you who want to think about this table seriously, it'd be a mistake to think about it as a mapping into DSM or a reconstruction of DSM. Rather, his theory with the definition of what a strength is and what is good in a person asks systematically in what directions can what is good in a person go awry. And he asks it systematically, and in its strongest form, it says there are 3 kinds of arinuses that happen to human beings. And the 3 kinds of arinuses for Chris, in its strongest form, are an exhaustive and exclusive nomenclature of what it is to be crazy, what it is to be mentally ill. So on this account, bipolar depression is not a mental illness. It's got some of the symptoms, recklessness and grandiosity are, and schizophrenia is not a mental illness. But some of its symptoms like anhedonia, lifelessness, and foolishness are. So if we're beginning all over again, we want to compare DSM categorization to Peterson categorization. And the comparison is revealing. So one superiority of DSM over Peterson is alleged that the symptoms hang together and form syndromes. And that is just not true. In fact, one of the great problems of DSM is its lack of specificity. And so one of the problems of the symptom-generated nosology is that automatic thoughts of loss automatically are crucial to depression. Thoughts of danger are crucial to phobias. Thoughts of disaster are crucial to post-traumatic disorder. So the DSM category, the symptoms don't form syndromes. And even worse, comorbidity. Now, comorbidity is a sign of great weakness. Anxiety and depression are about 60% comorbid. That tells you something's wrong. It doesn't tell you that these two things occur together all the time. The Peterson pathologies are pure categories. They're more unidimensional, and they're not congeries of symptoms. So here are the advantages that the Peterson hypothesis has over the DSM approach. First, it's theory-based, unlike DSM. And the pathologies are systematically related one to another: excess, absence, opposite. They're universal. And because the strengths, this is some of Chris's important work, the strengths are universal. Every culture, every religion, every politic wants them. So this lends itself to real cross-cultural psychopathology. They are natural classes. I think they're pure. And fourth, they don't need a medical model. They don't require symptoms, syndrome, and illness. And they're not reductionistic. They don't demand a biological basis for their reality. Now, that's quite important. There's a major new development in diagnosis for those of you who play with this. It's called the RDOC. It's Tom Insel's invention at NIMH. As Tom has disavowed DSM-5. What Tom is endorsing is the future convergence of behavioral symptoms with genetic underpinnings and biological symptoms. So the hope is that there will be some convergence, and that these three things, when taken together, will form the real psychopathologies. That may occur. I'm all for that. I see little sign of that. And if it occurs, I think RDOC and Peterson are viable alternatives. But importantly, RDOC requires reductionism. It requires a genetics and a neuroscience. Chris's is psychological. It doesn't require a biological basis. Now, finally, what does this mean about treatment? Let's say we take Chris's notion seriously. What does this tell us about treatment? Well, one of the very good things about DSM, sort of the best thing that happened, it resulted in something called evidence, the search for evidence-based treatment. And now, what NIMH did was to fund a lot of research on the categories, and then look for drugs and psychopathologies that spoke to the categories. And because reimbursement was prematurely tied to treating the DSM categories, people created pharmacology and psychological treatments that would somehow map into these categories. And it turned out when you did this, which exposed one of the great flaws in DSM, is the treatments turned out to be non-specific. So cognitive therapy works well in depression, works well in anxiety. Turns out works well in schizophrenia. They're the same moves. The serotonin drugs work okay in depression, but they also work reasonably in bulimia and in anxiety as well. And that exposes the problem of DSM. So what happened is you got a treatment potpourri of biological and psychological treatments that were gerrymandered to fit the categories that were funded, essentially. And I think this is good for some patients, and it resulted in evidence-based treatments that work. But I want to say, glad Elliot Vallenstein is here, since he said similar stuff. It's very interesting to me that the $30 billion endeavor in neuroscience has resulted in no new therapeutics. And the $30 billion effort in the Human Genome Project has resulted in no new therapeutics. And that's because the target, the DSM target, is unreal. These are not the real mental illnesses, to my way of thinking. So what do we know about the treatment of the Peterson disorders? Well, not very much. Are they treatable? Well, there are a few things we know. That cowardice can be ameliorated by exposure and by systematic desensitization. Despair can be ameliorated by cognitive therapy. Helplessness can be ameliorated by mastery training. And loneliness, all parts of the categories, can be ameliorated by anti-shyness training. But there's one final thing to say about the treatment advantages of Peterson's schema. You could work on the opposite, the absence, and the excess. But Peterson says, hey, work on the strengths themselves. Build the strengths themselves as the great buffers against psychopathology. Build creativity, build bravery, build good citizenship, build fairness. And strengthening of strength likely counters the absence and the opposite, if not the excess. So to conclude the scholarship part of this, Chris left a great project undone. It's Fermat's last theorem kind of project. But he bequeathed to us, just as Fermat did in the margin of his notes, a table for us to work from. The theory tells us that there are 24 strengths that are the good in a person. Their absence, their opposite, and their excess are the ill in a person. And given the difficulties, the swamp that DSM-5 is now in, it's my hope that one of you, one of his students, will take this seriously and bring it from an incomplete idea to a true masterwork. So that's what I wanted to say by way of scholarship. And I want to close with two things. One, again, one of the outpouring notes. This is from Dore Yapada. This is from Chris's last post in Psychology Today. Quote, I thought of my own mortality. What would I leave behind? Likely not a gilded statue that would survive for many centuries. Regardless, I did have the thought that whatever legacy I might leave, and however short or long it might last, I hoped it would be one that included what I shared with other people, as well as what I uniquely contributed. Unquote. It breaks my heart to hear these words and to know that I can't hear them in person anymore. Chris, you profoundly touch the lives of so many people in your own wonderful and awesome blend of wisdom, energy, humor, and love and care for others. We will miss you so much, but your legacy is so a part of our lives, our hearts, and our minds that I know you can never really leave us. I want to close with a poem that, not quite a poem that I know Chris was fond of. This is from the ending of Cat's Cradle, Kurt Vonnegut. I have to give you the setting of it. So, how many of you have read Cat's Cradle? In Cat's Cradle, the Caribbean dictator has banned the voodoo religion of Baconanism, but he's really a believer in it. And so on his deathbed, he calls the Baconanist priests, and they say the last rites together. It's responsive. But there's some words you have to know for the last rites. So one is wampeder. So a wampeder is the purpose that God puts you on earth to carry out. And second word is a karos. So a karas is the purpose. It's the group of people, unbeknownst to each other, who God has designated to carry out the Wampler together. The last rites of communism. Gott made Mut, Kron Dr. von Königswald. Jo mit Mud, echoed Papa Manzano. God made mud, was what they said, each in his own dialect. I will abandon the dialects of litany. God got lonesome, said von Königswald. God got lonesome. So God said to some of the mud, sit up. So God said to some of the mud, sit up. See all I've made, said God, the hills, the sea, the sky, the stars. See all I've made, said God, the hills, the sea, the sky, the stars. And I was some of the mud that got to sit up and look around. And I was some of the mud that got to sit up and look around. Lucky me, lucky mud, lucky me, lucky mud. Tears were streaming down Papa's cheeks. My mud sat up and saw what a nice job God had done. My mud sat up and saw what a nice job God had done. Nice going, God. Nice going, God. Papa said it with all his heart. Nobody but you could have done it, God. I certainly couldn't have. Nobody but you could have done it, God. I certainly couldn't have. I feel very unimportant compared to you. I feel very unimportant compared to you. The only way I can feel the least bit important is to think of all the mud that didn't even get to sit up and look around. The only way that I can feel the least bit important is to think of all the mud that didn't even get to sit up and look around. I got so much, and most mud got so little. I got so much, and most mud got so little. Den you vor da ona, cried von Königswald. Thank you for Leonio, wheezed Papa. What they had said was thank you for the honor. Now, mud lies down and goes to sleep. Now, mud lies down and goes to sleep. What memories for mud to have. What memories for mud to have. What interesting other kinds of sitting up mud I met. What interesting other kinds of sitting up mud I met. I loved everything I saw. I loved everything I saw. Good night, good night. I will go to heaven now. I will go to heaven now. I can hardly wait. I can hardly wait to find out for certain what my vomit was. To find out for certain what my vomit was, and who was in my cross, and who was in my cross, and all the good things our cross did for you, and all the good things our cross did for you. Amen. Amen.
Clearly, we chose well in having Marty give the first annual Chris Peterson Memorial Lecture. I know that Chris would be very, very happy and grateful. Many of the other character strengths would come out with regards to having such a wonderful talk and honoring Chris the way that you did. Thank you very much, Marty. I appreciate it. We also have another opportunity to continue to share memories, to fellowship, and just to get together and talk about Chris and other things and the work that Barney has done. We have a reception that is being held over in East Hall immediately following the session today. There's also another way if you're interested in donating to the Chris Peterson Memorial Fund. There's information on the website, and that fund will be used to first continue the memorial lectures, as well as support students research in particular, as well as faculty research. So if you're so able and interested in giving, please check that out. So the very last thing I want to say, I'm going to be very greedy with that, is to just share one last personal feeling with respect to Chris. So over the past year and after Chris's passing, I had an opportunity to hear from numerous people, whether groups, small groups, individuals, emails, conversations in the hallways, various places about how special Chris was in their relationship with Chris. And I must admit, being human, I was a bit taken back, because I always thought that my relationship with Chris was special. I figured, when Chris came here, I was a graduate student, and in some ways the first person here that we kind of worked with, and clearly was the first person that I felt comfortable with talking about my insecurities, particularly the first faculty member that I felt comfortable with talking about my insecurities and concerns and things, and thought, wow, this was a really special relationship. When I went off to teach at the University of Virginia, Chris, periodically we would still stay in touch and would always have a really kind word, along with some very, very funny words. I'm sorry you missed hearing those words, but he was very funny. But I thought, again, this relationship was really, really special. And then after hearing all of the comments by many of you who are here and many others who are here about their relationship with Chris, then I started thinking, wait a second here. I wasn't the only one. And it turns out that in reflection, the relationship was very, very special, just as it was very special to each. It just was not unique. And if ever there is a legacy that one would hope to have, I can think of no better one than to have so many very, very, very special friends and relationships where everyone thought that they were one in a million. And Chris was unique in making millions of people feel like they were one in a million. So with that, again, I want to thank you all for coming out. Hopefully you will also continue to come as we have more lectures in the future. And again, hope to see you over at East Hall on the 3rd floor terrace for the reception.